Buenos días a todos.
Everybody. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for being here in this security session of the 15th the International Conference of Mapfre Global Risk. I hope we will have a very fruitful conference here sharing our knowledge. My name is Pedro Soria. I am an industrial engineer and I've been working for more than 30 years with risk engineering and safety engineering, and right now I work as a technical representative of the area of engineering in Mapfre Global Risk. Well, I can see some familiar faces here. Some of you are already friends after so many years being professionals together, and thanks to our personal relationship as well. I have some colleagues. We all are playing in the same team, the area of claims and law. So we have a common aim. The main aim of this security session is having the possibility to share different experiences in different sectors, activity sectors, and these experiences will probably be applicable in our field of work, maybe not directly, but they will offer us the breeding ground that we can use in the future for the implementation of new ideas and new activities in our own field of study, field of work. For the next hour, we will be talking about boilers. Boilers, generation boilers, but also claims in boilers. Historically, these boilers have their generation companions like turbines. We were talking about turbines a couple of years ago, alternators as well. And within all this, boilers were like, you know, that item which didn't bring a lot of claims. But in the last few years, we have observed that there's been an increase in the number of claims, not only the number, as I said, but also of the total loss sum. So, what happens? Well, our work in this loss prevention, we have to reduce risk, and we deal with claims because, well, it's something that we haven't done completely right. But as these claims take place and these things happen, we have the possibility to learn lessons from them, to see what were the causes, what was the origin, and what were the underlying reasons for one thing to fail. On the other hand, these lessons learned in global risk and ITSEMAP, we have the mission of carrying out studies and research on boilers in this precise case, and we want to share all that information with all of you because, as I said before, we all play in the same team and we have common aims, not only in our functioning, but also when these claims take place, we also share the risk. So we all share that because the person insured, maybe they have their franchise, they have some policy limits that the insured person has to be responsible for. So we share the same risk. We're going to talk about full sums. We're going to talk about 100%, not only of what's paid in the policy, but also estimates on what would the general cost be, which actually has an effect on the insured person. I would like to thank my colleagues in the area of sinistrality of global risk because day by day, with their effort and professionality, they've made this research and this study possible, and that's why we're here today talking about it. Well, in this presentation, we will start with an introduction, talking about generation boilers in the general context of sinistrality of Mapfre global risk, the importance of the problem. Later on, we will talk about the generation chains, We will be describing these generation boilers, what the cycle of electricity generation is of these thermal plants and vapor turbines, to better understand the problem, and then we will get more deeper into the sinistrality study. We will see how the main sum is distributed, the general analysis of causes and circumstances for these things to happen, and what kind of boilers are related to them, and that will be the main scheme. We will also carry out an economic analysis, how we would distribute this loss, this benefit loss, within the range of possible retentions and policy limits, so what percentage of this loss would be covered in each case. And we will extract the very first conclusions. And then after that we will have the general conclusions of the study to see what we have learned and what lines of action we can follow. Throughout the whole presentation, we will have some graphs like this. We will have three parts. The first bar on the left, the blue one, that would be the percentage in that category, the percentage of number of claims corresponds to that category. That would be the full amount of claims with a certain sum which will be reflected in the red bar in the middle. And then on the left, when this bar is higher than the other one, we would have a higher percentage of number, so the average claim would be a smaller sum. So comparing those three, we can get a general idea of the average claim. If it's a very big one, we can have the possibility of having a very high sum, a very high percentage, but a small number. So we would be talking about a category in which we would have a very high average percentage. We created an indicator, which was this, the average, so we would just be dividing it by 2, and we would obtain then the indicator of the importance of each one of the aspects reflected. I would like to remind you that we're talking about a percentage of 100% in the sum, including the different agents, paying agents, and we have to acknowledge that it's, of course, an estimate. So in some cases, some of the claims have not been completely studied, but we have enough information so that the variance in these sums would be small. When we're talking about loss of benefit outside coverage, we would create these estimates on the period, the full stop period, and the general and net benefit. We move on to the next one. How are the different sectors distributed in the different activities? Well, here we have the different activity groups. We've got industrial, commercial, office buildings. We can see how the number of losses is quite relevant. We're talking about higher than €1 million. But as a whole, it's not very high. We would have a low average claim, average loss. Here we have the electric energy generation with a higher number of claims. And here we would have heavy duty and heavy industry with a lower number. And if we move on to electrical generation, we would have those two, which are in red, according to the higher number, would be thermal fossil, carbon and fuel, and also combined cycle, which have this balance in number and total sum, similar to the electrical generation sector. We're talking about electrical generation sector of more than 200 claims, important claims. Well, within this electrical generation, in which equipment, in which activity? Well, we would have the main essence of its activity itself, the part which corresponds to generation, that would be 90%. But here we have claims which correspond not only to these electrical generators, professional generators, there are also other activities in the heavy industry that generate electricity as well. Of course, they have these claims associated to their function. For example, petrol-related industries, and they have this share of electrical generation and the supply associated as well. And within this, we're moving toward where these claims take place. Well, they take place in turbines and engines, but then next to it, we have boilers that, although, the number is not, we see that it's not very frequent, but the total sum would be very high, that it would actually equal the turbines and engines. So we get to this time evolution graphic between 2010 and 2013, our study on claims. Between actually 2011 and 16, here we would have 2010, we go from 0. So we see that the first 2-3 years, 11, 12, 13, there's a growth, we have a number here. So in 3 years, half of the time we had 20% of claims in this period, but that would amount for 3% of the total sum. But in 2014, we can see there is an increase up to 40% in 1 year, with a growth of 30-something% of the total sum. So in 2014, there was that increase, but in 2016 we can see the highest increase, and that's how we see that the cost bar would just go up. And for everybody, for underwriters, for the insured user as well, of course. So, what are the main preliminary conclusions of this first analysis on boilers? Well, the electrical sector is important when it comes to claims, and it covers generation boilers. That's an important part, and also the growth which has taken place in the last few years. And we would have to determine with time if it's been an example of volatility of the whole amount of clients, something that's happened in a short period of time, or if this is something that is here to stay. And we would develop this study to see how we can work with it. First of all, we said we would talk about generation boilers, explaining how the system works. This would be the main image of a system of the thermal plant, vapor thermal plant with carbon.
Quite old. They have been following the same national application for about 100 years. They involve large investments, high capital costs because of the volume and the environmental liabilities with a coal deposit, with all the investments involved. There's the area in which emissions are treated at the smokestack, and this involves great investments. And with regards to functioning, we would have the boiler at which we would generate pressured steam. Water would come through here, cool water, it would be heated up, and the steam acts on a turbine, and the low temperature steam is condensed and the cycle is closed on the electrical side. the power of the turbine acts on an electrical generator, which distributes then in turn electricity to the grid. So we've seen that we've been working with pressure and temperature, and this would be the way we're going for. Out of thermal dynamics, the higher the temperature, the bigger the yield, the performance, and there were limitations because of the way in which steam was generated, and especially the materials. But with the improvements in the area of materials engineering, we can work with at higher temperatures and bigger yields. That is, from power stations with in the range of 42% performance. Now we're going to 45 to 50% yield, which is a lot of money for the company. So the trend is towards building boilers working at higher temperature and pressure. The higher the temperature and the pressure, the thicker the walls should be, because of the need for mechanical resistance. As the walls are thicker, the boiler becomes heavier and the thermal inertia is bigger. And electrical systems say that working at the same power for days cannot be achieved. There will be variations, and with the lack of thermal inertia, that should be taken into account in the design. Also, as I said, high temperatures, so from working at 500 degrees centigrade on the steam side, we'll work about 600 degrees inside, so the materials are going to be subject to high temperatures. In terms of boilers, in general terms, there are the multi-tubular, the heating goes through the duct and heats up the water, and then we have the water tube boilers. The fluid is inside the tubes. We're speaking about between 100 and 200 bars of pressure, and at that pressure you cannot work on big vessels, because it would be kind of a bomb at large sizes. So this is the system, and I feed water. That this is the water inlet. It would go down, and because of the effect of heat, it would be evaporated and condensed, and steam would go out through there, which would be subject to ulterior processes. So this is a typical power station. There we have the control room. This would be the turbine room, and this would be the boiler. This specifically is about 120 meters height. It's like a 30-story building. This is where the combustion gases treatment area is, and the smokestack. And this is when we enter into the boiler. This would be a typical boiler. This would be the furnace, where the main combustion process takes place. This is the primary air inlet, and these are the different packages of tubes. There's the evaporator going up upstream. There are the superheaters. We'll see what they're about. Reheaters, the economizer in the end, where the water comes in for the initial warming up. And we will see now in the model our saturation slope. Then we have temperature. Here is high pressure. There is liquid, steam, and liquid and steam. And above the critical point, we would have the supercritical area. The new generation boiler. So over that slope, we would have the boiler, our system, the pump, this is the evaporator turning the liquid to steam. We had an area for overheating, the superheater, and in red we would be in the turbine, and there would be an expansion of the fluid. There would be a reheat inside the boiler and the final expansion. The condenser, it would turn into liquid and it is introduce the system again. So the boiler is in blue, the economizer, evaporator, the superheater and the reheater. These would be the main elements. So when we refer to losses and accidents, you will see what I'm referring to. So we have become experts in boilers, in electricity generation, and we'll be able to better understand what claims are about and when they happen. We see that the sample of losses we have, you remember that it was around 100 Hertz and we've only got 16 Hertz there. But it shows us these claims are not reference to one or two power stations. We're talking about more than 300 stations of renewables. We are referring to about more than 70. When I say renewables, I'm speaking both of biomass plants and solar and geothermal plants, and combined cycle more than 300 centrals. And these plants also count on a boiler for steam generation. So overall we have more than 670 plants, adding up to 280,000 million euros, or 280 billion if we speak in American figures. But the population, the overall figures are not, of course, insignificant. With regards to description of claims and losses, I think we're going to cover some 12 or so. In this case, there's a boiler explosion. Once the feeding in the electrical supply failed, there was this was not detected. The primary air fan was not working. There was a loss in the air inflow, and if the temperature goes down, what would the operator do? I would supply it with more fuel, because the temperature was going down. After 15 minutes, suspicion started that the sense of maybe there was no air coming in, and 2 minutes after, an explosion took place. Another one, there's a fire in a boiler. Once the cold mills were stopped, these will be available in the internet, so you will be able to download it. As the cold mill was stopped, you've got to work with liquid fuel, the one which is usually used for startup, and there are similar circumstances. There's a drop in pressure in the fuel circuit, the signal is lost, and the system, as it doesn't detect a pressure loss, it still injects fuel, and the boiler still was going down in terms of temperature, and after 30 minutes fire was started. So the pipe had suffered from an important leak. That was the reason for the pressure not to accumulate, and the spilled fuel started a fire, and the boiler was completely lost. And it meant a 2-year stop. And after a few months, in another boiler, there was a steam leak, and after an engineering stop, it was seen that there was a problem with temperature controller, and it was seen that the brackets, the supporting elements were corroded, were damaged because of the steam leaks. This is another case of an explosion. After maintenance operations, it was started up. The flame control was cancelled because otherwise you cannot start it. And after changing the procedure, the flame could not be seen, and gas was fed into the system. There were 9 unsuccessful attempts of start. Without that sweeping, without the purges which are needed, and that was done for 9 times or 8 times. After on the 9th attempt, the boiler exploded. There's a pipe breakdown because of the pressure. It was a physical explosion. There's sometimes chemical explosion, but in this case it was a thermal explosion. There would be water kept in the system uncontrolled, and when the water reaches a pipe which is very hot, suddenly it turns into steam and gave rise to the physical explosion of the pipe. Explosions can be big, but as we're talking about pipes, the effects are more limited than in the case of large boilers. Boilers which control great volumes of water. In the case of multitubular boilers. Also, there's a problem, for example, of steam leaks when the welding work is not adequate. This is another case of a boiler explosion. On start, the boiler was stopped, and after a few seconds there was an explosion. Another explosion, in this case because of the fluid, of the bed fluid. It was a fluidized bed boiler. It was repaired, and when after the initial start, in 4 days' time, there was an explosion. And we see how it turns out. Another physical explosion, a normal operation after a series of anomalies at a reheater because of excess temperature when the temperature controller failed. Also, dry boiling is like when you leave your pan in the stove with no water, and the damages can be quite significant. This is a different case, the boiler of a thermosolar plant, a tower thermosolar, and at that time there are failure in the boiler that was created a leak, and then erosion because of contamination. After a stop with the cleaning with chemical products, the product entered the steam cycle, damaging not just cycle and the cycle of tubing in the boiler, but the whole of the process. So you may see that we had accidents of very many different nature, of varying nature, and with different reasons and causes. And now we're going to deal in our analysis. We're going to try and measure each of these aspects, circumstances and causes. We're going to try and answer a series of questions: how the type of boiler has an influence, where the losses are originated, how they are distributed in terms of size, which are the causes for claims and losses, depending, for example, on many issues. The circumstances can give us information, help understanding. This is an operation circumstances, thinking if I'm doing a normal operation, how the age has an influence, and if the maintenance operations have any relationship with the sales strategy. How do the losses distribute on a slope? We are adding up amounts there by the percentage of claims. About 20% of accidents cause about 80% of losses. It's a reasonable dimension. Usually is smaller than that. In turbines of this kind, and there's a great diversity in terms of losses, and you may see that the ones we have seen are big, but in this list we have from just a few millions to hundreds of millions. It's about 20% and 80% of the amount. And which would be the cause for losses? Arranged that the blue bar is like a lottery prize. It's quite distributed. Thermal shock, structural collapse, dry boiling, physical explosion, chemical explosion, steam leaks, fire. But then in terms of the amounts is when you can perceive which are the most significant money-wise, significant accidents. About 45% of the total losses in the case of fire. And thanks to our indicator, we could attribute some 25% of specialty to fires, some 25% to steam leaks, and then explosion, physical and chemical explosions, which would amount to about 25 to 30%. There you see the fire, steam leaks, and the amount, you may see how large was the bar corresponding to fire. So it, as an average accident, it gives you about a 700% percentage, and the average percentage are the most relevant ones. In terms of age, the age of the boiler, age is good for boilers or bad? Do you want to bet? Well, it fits it very well. So between 0 and 3 years old boilers amount for about 70% of the figures, and some 70% of the amount. So in this sample of accidents, we cannot blame it on older boilers, but on the new ones. New boilers usually show worrying situations. You buy a new boiler, you insure it, and you say it's got all new technologies and improvements built in. It's more technified, more systematized, but despite that all, something must be wrong with the new ones. And then the old age boilers, they're in between 0 and 10, there are no accidents. And we see there that younger boilers are the ones which created the biggest amount of problems. And then, according to the type of boiler, here we have that both conventionals and supercritical, the ones working at very high temperatures, they grow in terms of numbers and also in terms of percentage. So we have some 20-something% matching other accidents also happening. So conventional boilers are the most abundant, but the supercritical, which are more modern, goes side by side the conclusion I made before. In terms of operational context, there is a power station. in former times would be started, and they would be running at a specific power, and they would be running at good speed that way for years. But now the electrical grid is now rated on a per hour basis, so they're regulated to every hour. They've got to reprogram the power, or sometimes even to stop for some time in the day at times in which the consumption is low. So we may see that the interim operation, and in terms of incidences, it refers to incidents being detected before the accident actually happening, and the variables are the ones giving to us about 20% of losses and 50% of the amount. If we take off the peak accidents, the figures would be a little low. And in terms of startup, the accidents, many of them take place during the startup or in transient moments. So this is very good for working in stable conditions, but not that adept at working in variable running. So that maybe is the cause for so many accidents with no instances, etc. And then we have the part responding to testing, building, setup, which is also a period at which many accidents happen. But in any case, once they are running, it's the period at which the biggest number of accidents happen. Size matters. Well, yeah, not just linearly, but also there's a parabolic trend towards the accidents growing more in terms of proportion than the size of the boiler. So a large boiler suffering from a big accident, it involves that there's a bigger loss per day, loss of profit, and also the downtime is also longer. So there's a quadratic effect in terms of loss of profits, which will become accentuated because of size. In terms of origin, which is the origin, the source of the problem? Would it be the drum, the evaporator, the pump, the instrument panel? We'll see the sources of accidents. In terms of the fuel system, it would be problems in tubes would be the most important. It involves larger accidents, and in terms of figures, the tubes, of course, are the weaker point. The working conditions in boilers make it very easy for problems to appear in the pipes and ducts. So almost every year, the boilers have got to cool down, so all pipes are reviewed and replaced in case of leaks or problems. But sometimes there are smaller leaks, undetected leaks, which create bigger problems. Pressurized vessels also give us a certain amount, but not that big, piping accessories, and in general also we have the distribution. And the tubes, the pipes and the fuel systems are responsible for most of accidents. In terms of maintenance operations, we see that about 40% of accidents appear right after maintenance operations, and we will see that it's got any kind of reasoning behind. A maintenance operation, we've seen that it amounted to about 40% of the amount, so it reflected that accidents, apart from being quite frequent, they were bigger than average, and in terms of maintenance, the incidence is relatively small, and these accidents we may see that they are the smaller ones. And which are the circumstances affecting this? You may see that the addition is bigger than 100 because there may be different circumstances. Perhaps a problem caused by instruments and operators, the management, schedule, and the biggest number of factors, the greater the accidents. Material can fail, but if it was run by a good operator and the tooling, the instruments were fine, the accident can be reduced in terms of consequences. Maybe there's a problem with the operator, but the systems are running fine, the accident is controlled. When there are large-scale accidents, usually it's because all systems or elements influencing the context have been failing.
We do have as well the distribution of all the causes. Well, now we're going to move on to the distribution by amount of these accidents. We've got the line here, the number of accidents, a total of 1,200. 2/3 of those would be a loss in profit, in benefit, the green line here. And then we would have the blue one, which would be material damage. So there we have a profit loss, which is quite significant. If we take into account that we would be also talking about very huge investments with a very big profit as well. We can see how the influence of the deductibles is. Here we've got large-scale accidents that makes this curve very steep. We have low risk, sinistrality and frequency. Here we would have this curve. These 2 or 3 large-scale accidents make the curve be quite straight. So if we had here, for example, a deductible of 50 million, then the insured would have something like 43% of loss. In this case, in material damage. In the loss of profit, here we have some extreme cases with a percentage of loss and time, stopping time. And, well, if we had here a limit of 1 year, 12 months, then we would see that at least 1/3 of the cost of this profit loss would be retained by the insured. So that would have an effect in this curve that would normally be more like this, but in here we see that it's straight. As a whole, we have a combination of both. We've got, this is our line, our curve. In the small zoom, we can see deductibles of 1 million, 2 million, and that would have a very small effect. It would be a low percentage, taking into account these kind of accidents. But this gives us the idea that setting some limits, we can still, with a limit of 300 millions, which is quite common, we would still have a 25% risk over that level. And that is something to bear in mind when doing the final assessment. Well, these would be the first few conclusions of all the things that we've seen so far. We would see that by amount, we would have a 20% of the amounts would give us 80% of loss. So concentration of loss in small amounts, and that's quite relevant, quite significant. The reason, the cause for the accident, it would be very much distributed in 7 causes, although there would be a 70% of concentration. So the number would be very much distributed, but the amount would be in two reasons: fire and problems with pipes. H. Number is concentrated in new boilers, and the amount would be in new boilers as well. Usually conventional, then supercritical, and in amount we have 65% in supercritical. The relationship with the maintenance operations, we would have 40% after the maintenance operation, and fortunately 90% of the whole amount would have no relation to maintenance. Circumstances of operation, a good number of them, the operation in transit, but most of the amount would be 60% operation without incidents. And when it comes to the power of the boiler, the growth of the amount goes with size. Concurrent circumstances very much distributed, failure in material and failure in instruments, although with the total amount we would have material failure and management failure. Well, we've seen the full content, and that's why we're revising now the relevant circumstances. New boilers, new technologies, high power, these give us the majority of loss. And this is something we should reflect on. If they have a very high power, if there is supercritical, if there is a higher functioning, we have more net benefit. But because they are these very big-sized boilers, the repairing process takes a lot of time. We would be talking about something like €500,000 a day in this the cost related to stopping. The welding of high-quality material. The science of welding is very well known nowadays, but when we try to introduce a lighter material which actually holds for more pressure at high temperature, the steel, it's something that is not good anymore, and we can use different materials, and we can make sure that our new material will have great mechanical properties at high temperature, but welding seems to be the weak point, and not only here, also other activities in which we have appreciated some problems in very big, large-scale works. They've seen that, after everything's finished, they've seen how the welding is not being done in a proper way. There was failure in that. So nowadays we have the technology that we can develop to do some testing and to allow us for that to work properly. But unfortunately, we've had cases in which we've seen that we have these large-scale work with loads of millions of euros, and we have to actually dismantle it completely to rebuild it properly and redo it properly. We worry about these claims amount in new construction boilers, because there are many new plans and that are not having any problems, but there are other ones that are having very significant ones. The importance of the accidents that take place after maintenance. We have to check how we are revising what we have done. We do have also facilities thought to work on a base, working with regulation. We're talking here about older facilities with more primary elements and systems, and that means that there is a lot of operation there. The lack of proper use of instruments. So you could imagine, for example, you have the drum more than 400 degrees while measuring. That wouldn't be easy if it's in a very high position. So from these accidents and inspections carried out, we see that many of these instruments related to level, temperature, pressure are not working properly. They have not been optimized, and the operator knows about that. And this is like, Peter and the wolf. they were saying the wolf is coming, and finally you just don't believe that that's going to happen, and you don't believe what the gauge or the indicator is telling you, or the alarm is telling you, and then all of a sudden you have this accident. So finally, we lean the whole of the responsibility on the operator, and sometimes they have a sign which is not maybe very accurate, and they have to take decisions, last-minute decisions that are not shouldn't be taken lightly, because maybe it depends. It means millions of euros, and it's like being in a taxi and you start paying and paying as time goes by, and explaining that to the owner later on might be complicated. So we leave that to the operator, who's a person with the appropriate knowledge, but we would see that sometimes that's an awful lot of responsibility. So having seen that, areas in which we have to improve, well, the management of assembly projects. Probably 90% of that is great, but we would have a smaller percentage in which we would need to improve the management to make sure that everything's done properly. And if we want to build a boiler with appropriate welding, appropriate piping, all of that's been invented, and there are people who do it very well. And if something's not done properly, it is because the management has not taken place accordingly. In older plans, well, if we see that we have a device that doesn't last very long, well, maybe we need to use 2, 3, 4, or as many as we need to, so that until I cannot replace it, the reading of that gauge, the reading of that indicator is accurate. The management of security. The different security policies. In the chemical industry, for example, we have some security policies that are very important. We might be talking about risk assessment, an instrumental security system, not only having a device that actually measures or provides an alarm sign, or makes an emergency stop, but these should be measured. And if I realize that this device is not accurate enough, then I might need another one to reach the final and the most optimized working. Here we can see that these protections sometimes, there's a change in the shift, and then if one person doesn't tell the other one about something that's just happened, then this safety, the security is being lost somehow. So these changes in the facilities should follow a policy, because it's not very well studied. Sometimes it's not very well studied how these would affect the rest of the activities which are taking place. So in that sense, we need to take slower steps and work steadily. Also, the execution of maintenance. Sometimes we've seen how after maintenance we need to make sure that what we've done has been done correctly, and we haven't actually caused any problem in what was working properly. And finally, the training and awareness raising of operators. In the example of those 9 attempts to start the boiler, I'm sure that they had this protocol, and that there should have been a cleaning process of 10-15 minutes, and maybe they said, well, we skipped it a few times before and it was okay. So they had the training, but it's important to have this awareness raising as well, and that should come from the higher sphere. If we have the director of the plant explaining that maybe skipping that cleaning process would be irrelevant, then with this comes the loss originated. Conclusions. Well, the boiler, after everything we've seen, it's a static element. It doesn't move. It hasn't changed, its concept hasn't changed in the last few years, although the working conditions have changed a lot. So maybe because of that, we haven't paid enough attention to what this implies, to the implications. We have a limited number of claims and a distribution of 80-20. The sample is quite limited here, and it's quite worrying, as we said, the appearance of accidents, large-scale accidents in new boilers. We've seen that in other fields of technology with other new plants, oil plants, people do actually carry out very good practices on training and awareness raising for a long period, a period of 2 years before starting, in order to revise, everything that's been installed, etc. So here we've had some cases in which that work hasn't been done very thoroughly, and that's why accidents came about. The reasons are very different. Concurrent circumstances, as we said, we don't have just one cause, one element. For example, nail number 7 was the cause. No, the causes are very varied. When we do have large-scale accidents, when we fail in materials, management, operation, or instruments, when several circumstances align, these accidents take place. So we should work on all the legs of the table to see what's wrong. The loss of profit is also significant, 60% due to the benefit, the profit loss, which is something which is normal in this kind of activity. But this gives us also the opportunity to go deeper into management practices, new practices, which have been implemented very successfully before with quite reasonable investment cost in operation cost, and then we can have some long-term savings. And that's all, I think. We have revised everything we've seen. We've seen how the price of the boilers in the general accident scope, also the working of generation boilers and steam systems. In claims loss and accidents, we've seen causes, circumstances, an economic analysis, and some conclusions, and finally the conclusions of the study, which I would like you to retain, because the most important thing for me would be going deeper into management, to be able to make all of these work, as a clock would do. Well, thank you very much for your attention. I have 2 minutes left. But if there is any question or any comment you would like to make, you're more than welcome. Anybody would like to ask anything? Are you thinking about the break already? You're thinking about breakfast already? But we do still have 5 minutes. If you want to share your experience or ask any question or make any comment, as I said, you're welcome. Pedro, I thought your presentation was very interesting. I just wanted to comment that the last conclusion you highlighted is an experience that I usually find when I carry out inspections. Those procedures, internal procedures in the sector of electrical generation are not so much developed, or at least not as much as they are in other sectors. We would need a more cooperative vision in which the procedures would be developed. It's more of a hierarchy, and in this hierarchy, the decision taken, as there is a lot of weight given to the operator. In other sectors, these operators have also to take very important decisions, including chemical reactions, and this fear or this uncertainty, the operators have actually overcome that fear. And in these electrical generations, it actually caught my mind that phase has not been completely developed. Is there anybody who would like to answer that question?
Bueno, mi nombre es José Manuel Herrero.
My name is José Manuel Herrero. I am the director in research on accidents and loss. I've had to do research on very similar accidents, and there is a human factor always. That's a key factor, because at the end of the day, machines, technology and development gives us a lot of security, but it's actually people who optimize, implement, who get training on that. And one thing very interesting is that the functioning regimes of these plants have changed a lot, because before, in general, technology starting and stopping was a critical moment. Right now, they have to work under very varied conditions, and this creates a lot of uncertainty and extreme situations. In the sector of renewables, we have always been working with starting and stopping, most of all in thermosolar, many of those things, and also the needs for new materials and cycle conditions in which actually technique is taken to the limit. For example, anything which has got to ATHOP methodology and risk analysis in processes, it's true that that hasn't been implemented, but those who want to be pioneers in this field would have to take steps towards that direction. Carrying out this risk analysis work and shift, those who are going to be responsible for every shift, etc. I think that when we invest less on maintenance and we coexist together with non-common situations in measuring devices, etc., the risk goes up, and of course, at the end of the day, we have accidents. Training is very important as well, and I don't think there is one single cause, as we said, but all of this would have a great influence, for sure. Any other comment you would like to make?
Hola, buenos días.
Hello, good morning. My name is Carlos Lopez. I come from the nuclear sector, also generation, the operation department. I was not very much pleased when in the conclusions you talked about the procedural area. When we talk about techniques in renewables, well, that is a completely different world. But some of the aspects that were analyzed here can actually be transferred to, for example, the fields of turbines and condensator and the water cycle. But in nuclear, we have learned a lot in the last years, and I've been in a nuclear plant from the year 81. We've had some incidents in the world that have made us reflect on what's happening, very harshly actually. And we could mention here Chernobyl. This accident led, in the nuclear industry, this led to the development of a culture which is called the culture of safety and security. And I think that this culture would be interesting to be transferred to the conventional field with these accidents we've been talking about. The decision of a control office in which the operator, after failure in a device or an indicator, if that happens, that cannot mean 2 years of stopping and such a great profit loss, even if there is a hierarchy there, because the cost and the loss is much more important than that. And I agree with my colleague in the sense that we've been made to work in a very different way. Even in the nuclear sector, they're going to make us have these stop cycles according to what's working around. And we always know that the euro is what rules, but we need to have this mentality that knowing that negligence can lead us to a very high profit loss.
Hola, mi nombre es Ramón Presa.
Thank you. My name is Ramón Presa from Repsol. There's something that caught my attention, the big concentration of accidents in the first few years of operation of the facilities. Do you think that's because of the use of new technologies, that they haven't been tested so much, or defects in the implementation of the installation? Well, I would say it's both of them together. The management of change. Sometimes things change and mentalities don't change. So we used carbon fiber piping before, now we use new alliations of materials. So we say, well, now I buy this pipe, which is a new pipe, and I use this same welding material, and that's going to work. But actually, in reality, that doesn't work. It's a different kind of mentality. Before we worked on base, and now we can work differently. So changes have taken place, and we haven't actually managed that change accordingly. So new materials and new ideas should lead to new management changes in the commissioning. Because sometimes you go to the commissioner and you find something that's been done wrong. But you need to do that before. You need to start from the beginning with contractors, with vendors, the materials, the supply of materials, specifications. So we should increment our prerogatives and increment the requisites for procedures of welding, for example, because sometimes we work in with large scale and bigger boilers, and the cost of these accidents just speeds up, because sometimes this change has to start not only in the mind of the operator, but the mind of the person who takes the decision of getting involved in a project of this size, this scale, and from then we would be working with new rules, new regulations that in the different sectors have been stated, like in the nuclear sector or the oil plant sectors, and with different criteria to make the whole thing work. So if you think it's appropriate, we're going to go have breakfast. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you.
Gracias.